Hi everybody, I'm Tashlin, the newest contributing presenter here at Transport Evolved. Some of you may already know me from my video about Ducati deciding that they may go with e-fuels instead of producing an electric motorcycle, a decision I thought was both understandable and unfortunate. And speaking of understandable and unfortunate, this video. I suppose this video was always going to eventually need to get made, but I'd kind of hoped we'd have a bit more time together before it had to be. You see, if you watch my Ducati video, and you should, because it's really good, you will have noticed that I sound like I'm from America, which makes sense, because I am in fact from America. I grew up in New England. In fact, I've lived in New England my whole life. Getting ready to move out west is kind of terrifying in that way. But now, I don't exactly sound like I'm from America. And that's weird, because I in fact have never lived anyplace else. So what's up with that? You see, I have a neurological condition called Tourette Syndrome, which causes involuntary movements and sounds, called tics, not the little biting insect kind. And one of my many tics is a speech atypicality tic, which is what you're hearing right now. Now, the reason you didn't hear this in the Ducati video is because tics in Tourette wax and wane in both intensity and nature, and my speech atypicality tic is actually pretty cyclical. This comes around about every 18 months and sticks around for about 18 months, and it's been doing that since 2006. I also have quite a lot of other symptoms. I bark. Well, I don't think it sounds that much like a bark anymore, but it's a vaguely barking-like sound. I have a lot of physical movements, shoulder shrugging, sniffing, sometimes jerking my head, a lot of back and movements and twisting movements in my torso. And I also, although I should disclaimer that this is not the case for the vast majority of people with Tourette, I also do have coprolalia, the so-called swearing tics, although really it's socially inappropriate words and phrases, and the neurology underpinning why that is really fascinating, and I'm not going to go into it here. People with Tourette have to have both motor and vocal tics present within 1 year of their diagnosis to be diagnosed. They also have to be have been having symptoms since before they were 18, although diagnosis can happen any time. I was diagnosed as a kid. My uncle was diagnosed actually after I was. He was diagnosed in his 50s. And you're going to notice that some, especially if in a post-pandemic world we get to the place of being able to have, for instance, meetups with our fans, in which case you'll really notice it. You won't notice it as much in most of my videos because, for one thing, when I'm focused on a teleprompter or reading anything really, my tics tend to subside some. That's pretty normal in people with Tourette, that when we're concentrating we don't tic as much. And also, through the absolute magic that is editing, I can cut out most of my tics. I barked while I was filming the Ducati video, and you didn't see the bark in the final cut. That's why it's a final cut. But this, I can't really cut this out. What I do involves speaking, and this is how I speak now, or at least how I speak for the foreseeable future. I won't sound like this forever. We've definitely found that to be the case. Eventually I will sound like I did in the Ducati video, and there'll be a really uncomfortable couple of weeks where that's sort of shifting back and forth between the two, just as it's been kind of awkward and unpleasant over the last few days as I've been shifting back and forth between this and how I sound normally. Now, many people will call this, by the way, a British accent. I'm not going to do that because it's not actually an accent. It's a tic, it's a speech atypicality. And I don't want to insult actual British people. The whole situation is made more complicated, of course, by the fact that Nikki and Kate, the other two primary presenters of Transport Evolved, are in fact from Britain. And they have accents, real accents, not this. So let's back up for a sec, and I'm going to explain a little bit about what Tourette is, and I suppose a bit about what it isn't, and maybe a bit about how to interact with people with Tourette, because you'd be surprised how common it actually is. Lots of people with Tourette fly under the radar, and lots of other people with Tourette, our symptoms are noticeable, but not such that people necessarily comment on them. Because my symptoms tend to be pretty dramatic, it's hard to miss someone barking like a dog. I don't generally get to fly under the radar. I get a lot of attention for my tics, often not positive attention, it should be noted. I carry clever little cards that I can hand out to people that explain about my symptoms for, the days when doing things in public was a thing, and hopefully will be again someday. So, as I mentioned, in order to be diagnosed with Tourette, you have to have motor and vocal tics. And that can be an incredible range of things. Motor and vocal tics can be subdivided into complex and simple tics. So, for instance, jerking my head to the side, which is a tic I had a great deal growing up, it's actually one of the tics that got me diagnosed. That's a simple motor tic. Whereas, for instance, running my hand through my hair, if I had hair, which I used to, doing that repeatedly over and over, that was a more complex tic because it looked like something. Making a gesture, that's a more complex motor tic. When it comes to vocal tics, you have very simple things: barks, grunts, sniffs, throat clearing. And then you have much more complex things such as words or phrases, or I suppose this. I guess you'd call this complex. I don't really know. Another speech atypicality, by the way, one I don't have, but speech atypicality is a subset of vocal tics, not a super common one. Another one you might see is I've known people with Tourette who had stuttering tics, which is different than having a stutter. For one thing, because it sort of comes and goes as tics wax and wane, and because the kinds of treatments you would use with a stutter are ineffective because it's not a real stutter, it's a manifestation of the Tourette. Tourette's very weird. I've had symptoms of TS since I was 8. I was diagnosed at 13, and it never stops being weird. Sometimes very funny, should be noted. There are times when this tic is in fact rather funny. Oftentimes my tics are not entertaining, at least not to me. So one thing I want to touch on is that some people with Tourette, and within people with Tourette, it can be only some tics, have some facility to suppress their tics. That's something that comes up, so I want to address it. It varies in my case from tic to tic. I have some tics I can suppress for a period of time. I have some tics that I can't suppress at all. And I know people who can't suppress any of their tics, and I've known people who can suppress all of them. Suppression is a complicated thing, of course, because I said Tourette's involuntary. But there are arguments made about whether the term involuntary is a better fit. I don't really see that discussed all that often anymore. But let me make a comparison. If you have a real bad tickle in your throat, you're going to cough. And you don't think of coughing as something you consciously choose to do. But you could hold off on coughing for a bit. You could force yourself not to cough for a bit. It's kind of like that. And much like trying not to cough, or trying not to scratch an itch, or trying not to sneeze. For many people with Tourette, suppression takes a great deal of effort. Sometimes it's so all-consuming that you can't focus on anything else. As I said, my tics tend to subside some when I'm really focused. I don't tic a ton when I read. When I was learning to drive a car, I didn't tic terribly badly while I was learning to drive. I tic a lot more now because driving is something that's a bit more automated for me. When I was learning to ride a motorcycle, I didn't tic at all. And then once I got really comfortable on a motorcycle, I started ticking more. Although, frankly, you should be awfully focused on what you're doing when you're riding a bike. So I don't tic a ton on a motorcycle, but I have had to learn how to tic on a motorcycle without it endangering me or anyone around me. And that was a tricky balance. In fact, it's one of the factors in me not riding for a period of time. I had a tic on the highway that really scared the pants off of me. And that was one of the factors that made me sort of put my bike away for a bit. So, how do you react to someone with Tourette? Well, I can tell you what not to do, and that's tell them how awesome it seems like it would be and how much fun you think it would be. It's not. I can't speak for everyone with Tourette, of course. Everyone's experiences are different, and Tourette is a remarkably individualized condition in terms of how it affects every individual person. But, as a rule, not a barrel of laughs, not a ton of fun. Don't tell me how envious you are. That automatically puts you in a category in my brain that I can't say on camera because I don't want us to be demonetized, but you get the point. When I'm ticking, some of my tics are really loud. If I'm barking or screaming something offensive. Generally, I ask people to not talk while that's happening, if they're talking to me, simply because I'm not going to hear what they're saying. If you think me barking like a dog is loud, and it is, it's louder inside my skull. That's one of those things that's intuitively obvious, but you still have to sort of stop and go, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. I don't mind when people comment on my tics. There's not a lot of point in trying to find a lot of rhyme or reason. I've had a lot of people over the years sort of try to figure out why I'm ticking more or less in any given situation, or try to figure out the pattern to my tics. And I can tell you, after well over 30 years of this, there aren't a lot of patterns. The speech atypicality is actually convenient in that way. My husband knew that it was coming back relatively soon because A, we were getting due, and I didn't hear it, and I'll bet you didn't, but he heard it in the Ducati video. He said there were some ways that I was saying words that sounded like my brain was fighting with itself about what speech pattern it should be using. To the point that I took the time to warn my coworkers at Transport Evolve that this was probably on its way. Anyway, other things that I think that would be useful to know. The biggest and most important in my mind is that if you know someone with Tourette, you know maybe one person's Tourette. From the inside, you probably actually only know a piece of it, but Tourette is unbelievably individualized, and knowing one person and one person's set of symptoms doesn't give you a lot of real good sense of how someone else's condition is going to behave, and expecting it to is just going to frustrate everyone involved. Other things. People ask about medication. I have been on just about every medication there is for Tourette. In fact, as a kid, I was on a whole bunch of them at once. Didn't go very well. Some people are super responsive medication. I'm not. The most common class of medications used to treat Tourette just don't work on me. There is one drug that does. It's very fatiguing. I do take it at night so I don't tic as heavily in my sleep. There used to be this idea that people on Tourette didn't tic in our sleep because doctors asked us, do you tic in your sleep? And we said, no. And doctors went, okay. And then more recently, researchers thought, hey, we should ask people who sleep with people with Tourette if they tic in their sleep. And apparently our partners said, oh, hell yes, they do. For me, the tics make it hard to fall asleep. Sometimes they wake me up. So I take a med at night, most nights that helps. There's no cure for Tourette. There's no brain surgery for it. Figuring out exactly how and where Tourette lives in the brain has been really complicated and not super successful. Likewise, unpacking the genetics of Tourette has not been nearly as simple as doctors once thought it was going to be. Do I hope that someday the treatments get better? Yeah, that'd be nice. In my case, I have a lot of pain related to my tics. I broke part of my C7 vertebra due to a tic, which has caused ongoing problems. A lot of my tics are really uncomfortable. Some of them are really painful. It would be nice if they didn't happen. There's also cognitive behavioral therapies that have been somewhat effective, specifically cognitive behavioral intervention for tics, or CBIT, which is really successful for some people, somewhat less so for others. I've had a bit of mixed results with it. It's something I'll revisit at some point in the future. So that's a bunch of information for you. What does all this mean for you, the Transport Evolve viewer? Well, not a lot, except that I'm going to sound like this, and I'm going to sound like this for a while. So when I do other videos where I sound like this, and someone says, hey, you didn't sound like that when you did your Ducati video, I can refer them to this. Super convenient. It means I don't have to write comments over and over and over again saying the same thing. As I said, you'll probably see other tics of mine at some point on camera, and if you see me at a live event, or if we have a fan meetup or something like that, you'll definitely notice me ticking, and, you know, now you'll be somewhat aware of it, although I'll still carry my handy-dandy little cards. Anyway, thanks for taking the time to watch this. Sorry for the confusion. I wish that the tic had either not come back, or had started before I started doing on-camera stuff for Transport Evolved, but, you know, can't always get what we want. So, thanks for your time, and as always, keep evolving!